Hello, everybody. Hello. Oh my goodness. I have a word for you on today. So I'm going to set it up and just dive right into it. If you are new, if you have not heard me use the phrase future tripping before, I'm first going to start by breaking that down. So future tripping is what it sounds like, but it's two things really. So it is visualizing the future without God in it. And that can feel scary, that can feel overwhelming, and that can feel burdensome, right? How am I ever going to make this happen? If this happens, then what if this happens? And we just get caught up in what I call monkey mind and just sort of mental overload where it's just so much to sift through, and it can create this anxiety, which anxiety is visualizing the future without God in it, right? And that's overwhelming because we're not designed to carry God weight and all the extra, okay? But future tripping is literally going on these trips into the future, and it's not imagining or visualizing and meditating on whatsoever is lovely, pure, noble, and praiseworthy. It's tripping about the future, meaning I'm freaking out about the future. I'm losing my mind over the future. I'm getting emotionally caught up in things that aren't for sure going to happen. And a lot of times that's true, especially when we connect worry to the future. We worry about so many things that never happen. So it's a trip that we got to catch before we lose our minds, basically. So future tripping, if you've been caught up in it, it's essentially anxiety, but I call it future tripping to make it less dramatic and to also highlight how silly it is sometimes these trips that we go on into the future, right? And how we can make those more powerful and meaningful and impactful, because future tripping is not fueled by faith, it's fueled by fear, okay? So I am going to give you a tool, if you will, to help you pull back from the future trip when you catch it, all right? And this is that you are here on earth, alive and breathing now on purpose for a purpose. And I think sometimes the idea of purpose in and of itself is overwhelming because we make that so huge. Like, well, I don't know what my purpose is, and I don't know how to find my purpose, and how do I know if I'm living on purpose, right? So I got to a place in my life where I felt like that was heavy, and I just realized that I'm alive. Therefore, I'm on purpose. I'm alive on purpose. My job is to live like it. So one day at a time, one moment at a time, I'm going to intentionally live my life. I'm going to be available in this present moment. I'm going to be fully engaged and invested in the moment. I'm going to live on purpose, okay? And I feel like as I built momentum in being fully present and engaged in these moments and just present in whatever is, not needing it to be some kind of way, okay? As I do that, I build momentum. And I start to recognize trends and how I'm being led and how I'm being guided, and it evolves. So it's not necessarily something I search for and that I lose my mind over. It's something that happens as a result of me living on purpose and living in alignment, right? And paying attention to how I'm being led by God and guided by God and directed by God, okay? So things that have helped me do that, or a way that I've seen this come together to give you confirmation, validation, affirmation on today, I'm going to call it the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps. So purpose is connected to the 3 Ps. So when you are feeling like you are being moved, like you are being shaken, and we are meant to be unmovable and unshakable, right? So when you feel like you're being moved, or when you feel like you're being shaken, sometimes God does the moving, okay? And that is often on purpose. I'm thinking of an example with Ezekiel where God literally in a vision takes him to this valley of dry bones, right? And he has this visualization. God is asking him, can these bones live, right? And Ezekiel says, oh, Lord, you know, right? He goes with a safe answer, like, I don't know if they can live, but you know, right? Like, I'm looking at dead bones. They don't look like they can live, but you know if they can or not, right? But what God wanted to do this was a prophetic moment for Ezekiel, right? The bones, the dry bones, were representing Israel. So God wanted to take Ezekiel into a vision of prophesying to to dry bones that don't even have the anatomy, right? To live, right? So he wanted to see if he would speak and prophesy over these bones, if he would utilize his faith, right? And put his faith in action. It depends on what he saw. Does he actually see that these can live? That God can do some reverse engineering on these guys, right? That he can put flesh on the bones, that he can breathe life into the bones, that he can bring them into a new state, right? So it was a test, right? And then when Ezekiel snaps out of this vision, he goes back to Israel where nothing has changed. And that's the prophetic event, right? I am calling you in this time, in this season, to bring new life to Israel, to bring unity back to Israel so they won't be separated and divided anymore, right? So sometimes God does the moving, okay? So some of the unrest in our soul, it's not always us. It's not always circumstances and conditions. Sometimes God is getting our attention, all right? So I will say that. But the three Ps, I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll kind of break them down for you. So the three Ps, there we go. The three Ps are place, people, and plan. Place, people, plan. Place, people, plan. Okay. So purpose is connected to a place, to a people, and to a plan. All right. I have experienced this to be assignment based, project based, according to the season, according to what God is doing. Right. So it's not always what I think. And that's why it's so important to have a relationship with God so that we can be humbly following his lead and co-creating with him. All right. So an example that I have with people, place, and plan. Okay. So I'll give you like a couple just to give you some context and to see how this operates in your life. So when you are feeling or experiencing some unrest or some dissonance in your soul, pay attention. Okay. Pay attention to what that could be and what God is revealing to you, what you're learning, what God wants you to lean into. Just pay attention. That is work between you and God for sure. So example. Man, I don't know how many years ago now. Several years ago now, I was about to step into relationship with God on an entirely new level. So I was baptized as a baby, right? But I did not have relationship with God. I called that more intuition, but mostly leaning on my own understanding and trying to survive and just make my way in the world and self-help it all the way, right? So several years ago, I came into relationship with God. I had a salvation experience. My mind was blown. And immediately after that, my life felt like it went on fire, right? Like you would assume that life's going to get easier now that God is at the center, right? No, he shook like all the things up. Anything that could be shaken was shaken. And it was just a rough season. And it was one that I didn't know how long it was. It was one that I didn't know all the details of. It was one that I wanted to run from, but I knew that I could not run from it. So things that started coming up for me in this season were to get my health in order and on a different level. So I was led to do a no sugar diet, which was insane. That would have never crossed my mind before. But when it comes to dealing with greater emotional weight than I'm accustomed to, having sugar and having caffeine and have these other things in my system that could, just mess with your hormones or mess with your energy levels was not a good idea. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what was happening. Like get really clean about your diet. So I was led to do that. I was led to start serving at a church that I've been going to now for a minute, maybe like a year and a half or so. I'm like, I probably should at least serve. So I got rooted in a recovery ministry, or I took action on that, and I'll explain in a second. I was also led to turn down the noise. Like these were all inspired actions that I was given. Okay. So I was led to turn down the noise because what was most prevalent or evident to me at that time was that I needed to be able to hear God's voice over any other thing in my life, over TV, over radio, over other people and opinions of man, over any other voice. I need to be able to hear God over my voice even, right? So I needed to turn down all the distractions and all the noise. So I committed to not being in a sort of like relationship building season, or like a networking season, or like an out on the go and really active season. I committed to really consecrating myself. Okay. And then the other thing that I was led to do was write, which is crazy because I had never been led to write. I was told to write multiple times by many, many angels in my life, right? But I never actually was inspired to write. It actually sounded like punishment to me. So I just was never inspired to do it. But I was led that now is the time. Now you write. So these were things that were all coming up. Now, what was happening for me and what was spoken over that season was abide. That is your battle strategy for this season. Abide in me. Abide in me. Seek the kingdom first and abide in me. Like, just very, very basic. And I needed basics. I had no clue where to start. So I ended up really going on a recovery journey. So I ended up stepping into leadership immediately and was taking people through a Christ-centered recovery program, including myself. So I joke that God tricked me into that because at that time, the way I was set up was that unless I'm serving other people, I can give up on myself, but I can't give up on committing to other people. So that was part of the journey too. But I got planted in recovery, and now I'm leading in a recovery ministry. I'm training in a recovery ministry, and I'm on my own recovery journey. And I'm growing in relationship and knowledge of God. I'm becoming a prayer warrior, and I didn't even know how to pray. I'm really understanding and discerning God's voice for myself. I'm writing like insane amounts of writing. I've never written like that before. And I'm on a journey. Now, at times it was lonely. At times it was really emotional and sad. At times I was just bawling and I couldn't even cry before, so I don't even know why I'm crying. But here is what I know. That season, I was called to a place and a people, a ministry, and there was a plan for that season. And that was becoming evident as I started taking those divine actions, those inspired actions. As I took them, the plan unfolded. I didn't have to force. I didn't have to do a lot of figuring out. I just obeyed the inspired actions and the doors opened. I didn't really have to, go through extra training or do all these other things. Like, God just opened these doors because I was in alignment, right? So that's an example of a place, a people, and a plan. So this was all about recovery. It was all about ministry and service and healing and growth from a Christ-centered place, right? And it was about the people that God really wanted to touch at that time in that season through that ministry, right? Now, I will say, after a few years in that ministry, I felt this stirring, like time is up. Like I'm being called somewhere different, right? Like there's more, but like, what is it and where is it? I didn't have the details, right? So I was waiting on those inspired actions. Okay, like, where is the place? Like, if this isn't it, I thought this was it, but if this isn't it, like, where's the place that you have for me? And then who are the people that you're calling me to, but that also can build me up or can champion me or keep me accountable and help me, right? And mentor me even, right? And what is the plan, right? This interesting limbo space for probably a year and a half. So that was an uncomfortable where I am and not take on more responsibility. So anytime I was asked to take on more or offered something, I just gracefully declined, right? Because the word says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So I'm like, okay, this isn't my place. There's more for me, but I don't know what that is yet. So I'm just going to be excellent about what is here now and trust, right? So sure enough, around my birthday, I was led to go to Florida for a conference. So on my birthday, I usually like traveling and learning. It's usually what I love to do. So there was only one conference that came up in the Google. The Google's prophetic, right? So there was only one conference that came up, and it was on the exact dates that I had, and it was a prophetic leadership conference. And I'm like, that must be it. Like, that's clearly where I'm called to. So I call, get some information about it, end up booking a trip, and then hurricanes happen in Florida. So the conference gets canceled. And I'm like, well, this is weird, because I'm sure that I was being led to this. So what's that about, right? So I was somewhat discouraged by that, but also gradually trusting that there's a greater plan operating here, right? And I believe that I heard God correctly, and I'm going to just trust that this is going to unfold when it's designed to. So the conference is rescheduled for, let's see, that was in September. 4 months later, it was scheduled for January. So I don't end up going on vacation that year, and I go in January. So I take some time in January. I go to this conference. I'm like, whoa, yo, like, this is clearly the more that I've been waiting for. Like, this is the knowledge. These are the people. Like, this is just like blowing my mind. Like, what I'm learning, what I'm getting exposed to, like, wow, right? So then after this conference, I'm coming back to Texas, and I'm like, dang it, because now I'm exposed to this knowledge and this information. As far as I know at this point, nothing like that exists where I live. So what does that mean? Like, what am I supposed to do with that, right? So then I am inspired to go on what I call a church treasure hunt. I don't recommend this unless you're guided to do this, because I didn't even have the energy to do this for the longest time, but I was led to do this. So I start going on what I call a church treasure hunt. And I probably went to 10. So 10 to 13. So I went to a different church every weekend for a period of time. And I just started sitting there, and I was hearing God at all these places, but I wasn't getting that affirmation to get rooted, to plant, none of that. So I end up at one church, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that space. I was kind of just like, I don't know. But I saw when I had gone to the restroom there that they had some sort of flyer in the women's restroom that talked about a women's conference that they were having that very next weekend. So I was like, okay, like, I didn't really feel the vibe necessarily, but I'm going to show up at this conference. Show up at this conference. There is a speaker that is talking, and she's very much matching what I had just experienced a few months prior at this prophetic leadership conference. I'm like, yes, like, there is something here that exists. I don't know who this woman is, where she comes from, but I need to thank her, because that really encouraged my spirit. So I went over to honor her, to thank her for what she shared. And she invited me into a course, I suppose, or like their prophetic community, that I should just get planted into it. Come to find out, I become, they didn't have any spots open, but I become a part of this prophetic pre-launch community for a new church that was moving to Texas. And I'm like, how did this even happen? So sure enough, I'm a part of this pre-launch community, and then I'm a part of training in the prophetic. It blew my mind, right? And then I ended up getting into ministry school at the very church that I didn't feel the vibe of, which is hysterical, and started really growing and getting surrounded by a spiritual covering and the people, right? So interestingly enough, just backtracking this, and then I just want to make sure that you can see kind of different ways that this has operated in my life, so you can look at your own life. But backtracking for a second, check this out. So I was feeling that stir for about 1.5 years, right? That there's more for me. Then the conference gets canceled, but check out the timing. So had the conference not been rescheduled, I wouldn't have been exposed to the new information or be inspired to go look for that content in Texas and met and become a part of this new group that would have and thought differently in terms of who they are and what they're called to. All a plan for that. Okay. And it was just wild how that unfolded. But again, there were inspired actions. And as I took those, still not knowing fully the details, but as I took those, the plans unfolded, right? So I can tell in my own life when I'm trying to force a place, or when I'm trying to force relationship or make relationship happen, or when I'm trying to force and lean on my own understanding to execute my own plans, it feels that way. It feels hard. It feels like there's resistance connected to it. It feels like I'm going upstream, right? But when I'm surrendered, when I'm humble in spirit, right? When I'm poor in spirit, so to speak, right? When I'm operating under the Beatitudes, really, when I am present and really developing a relationship with God, I start to pick up on the leading and the guiding of Holy Spirit and the inspired actions to take. And as I take them, it's a joyful journey. Like the plan starts unfolding and I just take the steps. I'm not fighting. I'm not resist for it. They just open up for me. It's like, you're here, come on in. You are experiencing this distance yourself future tripping. If you are getting caught up in and really just falling into fear rather than rising in faith, think about these 3 P's. Purpose is connected to 3 P's. Okay. It's connected to a lot of things, but 3 P's are often in common. A place. Okay. There's a place that you are called to, and it can be for a reason. It can be for a season. Some people it's a lifetime, right? I've often experienced reason and season. Okay. So keep that in mind, being called to a place. Sometimes where you currently are, the inspiration, the anointing, it can feel like that dries up because you're no longer going to be fed there. You're no longer going to pour into that space. It's getting you to kind of recognize what's happening so that you can be ready to move. All right. So check that out. Place. Now, people, there's a people that you're called to, whether that is, it's usually tied to the plan. Okay. And to the place. So for example, when I was in a recovery ministry, I'm called to steward Christ-centered recovery. I'm called to walk out Christ-centered leadership. I'm called to minister, like literally in the recovery space. Okay. So there's a certain people that need that ministry, that need that healing, that need that compassion, that need that presence and just that heart of God. So I was really developing the heart of God. Okay. Now, the plan there was to help really bring or usher this ministry into a new season. They were going through new leadership. They were going through a different transition, and I was there to help launch that. So part of what's on my life is this launch anointing. Getting started, and these need help. It's people that I can pour into. It's people that are in a place where they need, right? But they can't necessarily give. Okay. Man, we're getting some weird light now. Weird lights. Weird. Okay. We're gonna see if I can. No. We're just gonna have to deal with the light here for a second, for the sake of the message. Okay, so then I was called into a place where I actually could get fed too. Otherwise, it would have led to burnout. So I needed more accountability. I needed more leadership, particularly in the prophetic and how God's spirit in the prophetic ministry, what that even means, right? Totally different operating system, right? So I was called to a different people, a different place for a different plan. Okay. Which, to be honest, is still unfolding, which is pretty cool. So just wanted to share that. Oh my goodness. It's going to drive me crazy. Musical chairs. Better? Better than it was, kind of. Okay. So at any rate, I wanted to share that with you on today to really invite you or encourage you to think about what might be shifting. I started to notice in these different seasons, the place just didn't feel right anymore. And then I started to notice that the people weren't able to give what I was being called to, or weren't weren't prepared to go to that next place with me, right? Which is neither here nor there, good, bad, right, or wrong. It just kind of is what it is, right? And then, which is also a really beautiful thing, being able to separate without drama. Anyway, and then there was a new plan. There was a new level of knowledge. There was a new level of development and growth, and others weren't ready for that or hungry for that, right? And God can put this hunger in you to give you this momentum to go after a thing and pursue a thing, right? So I felt very alone in that place around those people, even though I was surrounded by people, because I was no longer a part of that plan. That was a part of the plan, but that was no longer a part of my plan, okay? And it served me, and it was on purpose and of great service, right? However, God does a strength to strength and glory to glory journey, right? So then when I moved into a new environment, when I moved and started surrounding myself with new people, I started opening and unlocking many different things, right? And then the plan was to equip me differently in order to handle things that were in my life, whether that was career, finance, relationships. I was being given tools, right, that I would need to be the light in these dark places that I happen to be planted in, right? And if I would have stayed in an old place where the anointing dried up, right, and been around old environments and situations, I wouldn't have had the capacity to handle what was in my life, or I wouldn't have been able to steward well what I was given. With me? So when you are being moved, sometimes God is doing the moving and sometimes God is doing the stirring. So it's really important to pay attention to that when you are feeling that start to happen, and pay attention to who you're surrounding yourself with, because sometimes who we surround ourselves with can really affect the unfolding of our destiny. It can destroy our lives also. So it's very, very important to recognize connections versus divine connections, and people versus kingdom-minded people, okay? And the environments to thrive might look different than what you've experienced in your own life. Like if you've been groomed for survival, you might in your own flesh, in your own nature, find environments that feel comfortable, that you're familiar with, that you know how to operate in. But a lot of times when we're walking with God, he calls us and guides us and leads us into new environments that we feel like a sort of out of place in the room, but he teaches us how to be qualified to stand in that room, right? God qualifies the called, right? So it can feel uncomfortable when we're moving and shifting, but that's why it's a step-by-step journey. A lot of times God is not revealing the whole thing. Like he might give you pictures, but a lot of times it's next steps that you can just step into, okay? And then the plan is getting these downloads and this wisdom and this revelation from God, because that's what you stand on as you encounter interference and distractions and challenges and tests, right, that come up on your way to stepping into this new place of promise, okay? So instead of future tripping, the invitation on today is to think about purpose. Are you being led and guided to a new place, people with a new plan? Are you being led to view this place, this people, this plan differently, right? Is there a certain area that God really wants you to lean in on? Is he really inviting you to seek him on the plan? Is he inviting you to show up differently with the people? Is he legitimately calling you to a new place? These are things to bring to God, to work out with God, to co-create with God on, okay? But recognizing this can take the tripping out of the future so that you can activate faith and so that you can see God's glory and his plan revealed, which makes it such a more exciting, exhilarating, joyful adventure when you know that God goes before you, that God guides and establishes your steps, that God has good plans for you, that God is taking you from glory to glory and from strength to strength, right? And that he's your rear guard too, right? So he's got you covered. And so when you view that, you can surrender whatever fearful thoughts you had, whatever forceful, leaning on your own understanding agendas and plans that you had come up with, you can surrender all of that, lay it all at God's feet, and let him reveal things to you. Let him guide you and just experience what it's like to be led and empowered by God's Spirit, right? By his power and for his glory. There's nothing like the freedom of living in that divine rhythm and stepping into these new places and encountering these people and watching God's plans unfold. It blows your mind, and you operate with a whole new level of confidence and faith and authority than you would have ever had access to on your own. So that is my encouragement on today, that you can really like go or release future tripping by tapping back into purpose, which really is fueled from your relationship with God, and understanding the 3 P's of place, of people, and of the plan. Because sometimes we get so caught up in just plans and strategies, and a lot of times they're just our own, and we're not involving God in them at all. And it's, you know, we see something, like many are the plans of our hearts, right? But it's God that establishes our steps. And as we release our plans and invite God into our lives to guide and direct us, he will. And so a lot of times it's just getting out of the way so that we can be a part of his way. Okay. So that is my message for you on today. If you guys want some coaching around this, that is my passion. That is what I'm here to do. You can check out julianapage.com. I have spirit-led coaching packages or program options for you. I also have a self-mastery course, which helps you ask better questions and get way more gold out of your soul, just drawing that out of yourself. So super powerful if you want to do a self-paced, guided program that is available for you. You can also tune into the Spirit-Filled Real Talk podcast with Juliana. I do new episodes every Saturday.